Okay, ready to go? Tanse, Lanate, bon matin. Good morning to everybody here. I want to, attending this press conference this morning, I want to welcome everybody to the traditional First Nation Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. As I do every morning, I get up and I thank the Creator for this day so that we can look after our families. Health is really important. We're going to be talking about that today. And I also want to, as I do every day, recognize my wife and my family. Women are the bedrock of our community. And we should say no to violence to women. Let's just say no to violence to women. I also, as Canadians, we must recognize that we must recognize our commitment to the truth and reconciliation, and to also to, in particular, bring justice to missing murdered Indigenous women and girls across this country. It is my honor and privilege to, let me just put this right here. You know, it's my honor and privilege to speak today to you. When I decided to run for the NDP, one of the most important reasons why I ran was because of Jagmeet Singh. He is a family man. He is committed to Canadians and represents the values that I hold dear to my heart. He works hard, he's sincere, and he's genuine. And Jagmeet, I want to thank you. I had a tragedy in my family. My mother had died the first day of the when the campaign started, and my brother phoned me and wished me well and gave me condolences on behalf of my family. And so for that, I say thank you, brother. To me, that meant a lot. And so, you know, I want to say this to Canadians, that it is my honor and privilege to introduce Jagmeet Singh, who I believe will one day, soon, will be the Prime Minister of Canada.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Robert. I want to acknowledge our other candidates, Claire and Kyla, that are here with us today. And as Robert was mentioning, we're here to talk about healthcare, and I want to acknowledge the healthcare workers behind me. This pandemic has been incredibly difficult. It's been tough on all of us. And we've seen the toll it's had on our healthcare workers. We've heard stories from healthcare workers that are burnt out. Nurses had a day of action, and they outlined how the work conditions are untenable. The situation is severe. It's at a disaster point. And it's because of cuts to healthcare. We've seen the federal government cut healthcare transfers over the years. Mr. Harper brought in massive cuts to healthcare that Mr. Trudeau continued. He continued those very same cuts that he criticized. So he continued that same pain that we're feeling today. When our healthcare system is underfunded, it is no surprise. When federal governments continue to cut the funding, it means our healthcare system, our public system, gets starved of funding. And then we see conservative premiers that add to that pain by cutting those essential services, cutting the resources, and cutting staffing levels. And then we have healthcare workers that are getting burnt out because they've got to do too much with too little time. It is impossible. It is impossible to do the work that they do. And I want to acknowledge them. I want to salute them. And I want you to know that it's not enough to just acknowledge you. We're going to fight to make sure you get the funds, the resources, the work conditions, and the staffing levels necessary to do the care to deliver the care that you know you can and want to deliver. I want to acknowledge you once again for your courage in this pandemic, your resilience, but it shouldn't mean that you have to be resilient against the odds. It means that we need to step up to provide you with the tools, the resources, and the staffing necessary. You know, Mr. Trudeau talked a lot about healthcare, but he has shown again and again that he is not committed to it. He has not reversed the cuts of Harper that he criticized. And on top of that, another really key commitment, which we believe very strongly would help our healthcare system, is pharmacare. That one concrete promise would have significantly lowered the cost for families. It would ensure that people get the medication they need, that they don't try to cut their pills in half or skip taking the medication they need altogether because they can't afford it. And we know what happens. Healthcare workers know what happens when people don't take the medication that they need, when they can't afford to take it, they end up in the hospital. Mr. Trudeau has made it really clear. He's all for show. He talks about healthcare mattering, and then the first opportunity to vote for pharmacare, he teams up with Mr. O'Toole to vote against it. Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Trudeau teamed up to vote against healthcare workers. They teamed up to vote against getting the healthcare system the investments necessary. They voted against pharmacare. We also know in this pandemic, we spoke to some folks that work with seniors, that our seniors and our loved ones in long-term care were amongst the hardest hit by this pandemic. They bore the brunt of this pandemic with their lives. Both Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole, despite knowing that, and despite knowing that for-profit care was where the worst delivery of care happened, because those for-profit centers cut corners. They understaff. They cut the hours of care. They cut the resources necessary to provide the right levels of care. Despite that, knowing that for-profit care is bad, Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole voted against removing the profit and the greed from long-term care. They have shown clearly they are not on the side of workers. And so I want to put to Canadians the choice you have in this election. You can vote for Mr. Trudeau, who is all for show, who supports the ultra-wealthy, supports the super-rich, and lets you down, and people end up paying the price. Or you can vote for New Democrats, who will fight for you, who will lift you up, who will invest in healthcare, who will support our frontline healthcare workers, who will make your life better. We are fighters and we are here for you. Donc aujourd'hui, je veux parler de les soins de santé. Et c'est clair que dans cette élection, vous avez un choix entre M. Trudeau, qui a voté contre une assurance médicaments en travaillant ensemble avec M. O'Toole, et les néo-démocrates qui vont se battre pour vous. On est là pour vous. On a dit clairement qu'on veut investir dans les soins de santé. M. Trudeau a coupé à maintenir les mêmes coupures de M. Harper. Donc, ces coupures font mal à notre système de santé, ça blesse notre système de santé et on veut renverser cette situation. On veut investir dans nos soins de santé pour protéger les travailleurs de santé qui sont derrière moi. Ce sont les travailleurs qu'on doit protéger, on doit aider pour qu'ils puissent livrer l'aide et les services et les soins aux gens. On est là pour vous. Vous avez un choix dans cette élection entre M. Trudeau, qui donne des belles paroles, mais toujours protège les intérêts des autres riches, ou les néo-démocrates qui vont se battre pour vous. Vous devez oser et vous devez voter. I also want to talk about the situation in Toronto with the Toronto candidate. The Liberals took 2 days to decide to release or to get rid of this candidate. It should have taken no more than 20, it shouldn't have even taken 20 minutes. It took them 2 days to do something that shouldn't have taken them 20 minutes. That is an insult. What Mr. Trudeau has continued to show is that he does not believe women. He does not listen to women. And there's a number of examples. The recent candidate in Toronto, Raj Sani before him. The fact that he has done nothing to implement the #1 recommendation to protect women in the Canadian Armed Forces, an independent process. There's a pattern of behavior here where Mr. Trudeau does not believe women. He doesn't have the courage to take on powerful men. He protects powerful men instead of protecting women, instead of standing up for women. And that is wrong. Je veux ajouter encore qu'à Toronto, avec le candidat, ce qui s'est passé, ça n'aurait dû prendre 20 minutes et il a pris 2 jours pour prendre une décision. Ça montre encore le fait qu'il ne respecte pas les femmes, il n'écoute pas les femmes et il ne croit pas les femmes. Et c'est une continuation avec la même chose avec un candidat, Raj Sani, et aussi ce qui se passe dans les forces canadiennes. C'est clair que M. Trudeau et les libéraux n'écoutent pas les femmes, ne croient pas les femmes, et on a vu les résultats. Encore, on a des dangers dans nos forces canadiennes. Et le primordial enjeu, c'est d'avoir un processus indépendant. M. Trudeau a eu 6 ans de le faire quelque chose, il n'a pas le fait. With that, I'm ready for any questions you might have.
First question, we have John Ivison from the National Post.
Mr. Singh, 2 days from the election day, do you agree that in principle, the largest party coming out of the election should have first crack at forming government?
I think people have a choice in this election, and Canadians will make that choice on Monday. But I want to put that choice to you. You got Mr. Trudeau, who's all for show, who protects the super rich, or you got New Democrats who will fight for you, who will lift you up. I believe New Democrats will make life better for people, and I encourage you all to get out and vote on Monday and vote for New Democrats. Vote for these incredible candidates here in Saskatoon, for Robert, for Claire, for Kyla, and vote for New Democrats across the country.
With respect, you didn't answer the question. It's not a hypothetical question. It's a question about principles. Do you think, in principle, the largest party should have first crack at forming government?
I think in principle, Canadians are going to decide what type of parliament we have on Monday, and that's going to be their choice. But it's a very important choice, and people are wondering what to do. I've been hearing from so many people that have been saying, I can't vote for Liberals again. I can't pay the price of their broken promises. It hurts me and my family. I can't do that again. You Democrats are here for you. We will fight for you. We'll make sure the super wealthy pay their fair share, and we invest in you.
Next question, Alex Ballingall, the Toronto Star.
So, if the NDP formed government, if you guys got enough seats to hold power in a minority parliament, would you enter into any sort of formal arrangements with any of the other parties, either the Liberals or the Conservatives, in order to have a stable parliament?
Well, we've shown in this pandemic what we've done in Parliament. When a minority government was chosen, we showed Canadians, we fought for you. We fought to get more help to you. And we saw what Mr. Trudeau was doing in this minority government, looking for an excuse to go to an election, calling an election that was selfish. And he showed. He is all for show. He does a lot of things, he says a lot of things, but he doesn't follow through on them. If he wanted to do any of the things that he promised, he could have continued with a 2-year mandate. It's clear Mr. Trudeau has been all for show. He's protected the super wealthy. A number of times we've looked at all these examples where he's protected the pharmaceutical industry. He's protected the super wealthy. He's protected the for-profit long-term care homes. We are fighters. We want to protect people. We want to fight for you. That's a choice Canadians have to make in this election.
I don't think you answered the question, though. If you became the Prime Minister in a minority parliament, would you enter into a coalition or some sort of accord with any of the other parties?
Well, we can lay out what we've done so that Canadians can make a good decision on who they vote for. What we've done in Parliament is to make it work for people. That's what you can count on. Our goal is to make Parliament work for you. While other parties try to posture for power and posture for position, we have been single-minded in our focus to make sure people get help. We doubled the CERB, we increased the wage subsidy, and now coming out of this pandemic, we've got a choice. Who's going to pay for it? We believe it should be the super wealthy. Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole don't. They believe the pressure should fall on you. They voted against taxing the billionaires. And so they made it really clear. They're not in it for you, and their decisions are going to hurt you. You Democrats are going to fight for you and make life better. We're going to make the billionaires pay their fair share. We're going to invest it in you. We're going to make Parliament work for you. You can count on that.
Prochaine question, Claudie Côté, TVA Nouvelles.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Ce matin, Justin Trudeau a une fois de plus demandé aux électeurs progressistes de se rallier au Parti libéral pour éviter l'élection d'un gouvernement conservateur minoritaire. Quelle serait votre attitude ou votre stratégie à l'égard d'un gouvernement conservateur?
Donc, on a une déclaration pour les progressistes. M. Trudeau n'est pas un progressiste. Et on a vu son bilan. Il a montré à plusieurs reprises qu'il veut protéger les intérêts des ultra-riches. Il a voté contre l'assurance médicaments. Il a voté contre faire payer le juste part des ultra-riches. Il a voté contre enlever les profits dans les centres de soins de longue durée. Donc, M. Trudeau a pris des décisions qui blessent les gens. Et les gens me disent, on ne peut pas se permettre un 4 ans de plus de M. Trudeau. On va voter pour l'NPD parce qu'on a vu le bilan de M. Trudeau. À chaque enjeu qu'on tient en cœur, il sait empirer la situation. La crise climatique s'empire. La crise du logement s'empire. M. Trudeau a pris des décisions qui blessent les gens. Les néo-démocrates vont se battre pour vous.
Maintenant, une question sur l'environnement qui est une de vos priorités. Vous l'avez dit à plusieurs reprises. Bon, dans les derniers jours, on a pris souvent l'avion avec vous, M. Singh. Vous avez traversé le pays pour faire parfois de très petits arrêts pour aller rencontrer pour quelques minutes des électeurs. C'est pas un peu contradictoire sur votre vision de l'environnement de faire autant de déplacements pour si peu de temps?
Si on parle de l'environnement et on parle de une manque de clarité, c'est vraiment M. Trudeau qui manque de clarité. Parce que, ou plus que ça, il fait l'opposé de ce qu'il dit. Il dit qu'on doit éliminer les subventions pétrolières et au lieu de les éliminer, il les a augmentées jusqu'à 900 millions de dollars par année. C'est le même niveau, c'est plus que les niveaux des conservateurs avec Harper. Donc, ça, c'est quelque chose qui montre clairement qu'il n'est pas quelqu'un qui peut défendre l'environnement. Il a montré avec son bilan, c'est le pire bilan du G7. Il a augmenté les émissions. Il exempte les grands pollueurs. Et nous, les néo-démocrates, vont se battre contre la crise climatique en créant des bons emplois. C'est nous l'option pour les gens. Si vous avez des inquiétudes par rapport à l'environnement, vous voulez quelqu'un qui va se battre pour l'environnement, défendre l'environnement, faire face à la crise climatique, c'est nous, les néo-démocrates.
In English, please.
When we talk about contradictions, we look at Mr. Trudeau when it comes to the environment. His entire track record is a contradiction. He promised to reduce emissions and instead increase them. He's the worst leader amongst all G7 nations, has the worst track record when it comes to emissions. He's the only leader who's increased them. These are other industrial countries as well. He has increased emissions year over year while promising to reduce them. He promised to end fossil fuel subsidies and literally did the opposite. He increased them. I mean, he promised to eliminate them. He increases them to higher than what was happening under the Harper Conservatives. So when it comes to the environment, people know very clearly Mr. Trudeau cannot be trusted. And people tell me that all the time. Young people tell me that. They say, we can't trust Mr. Trudeau. He has broken his promises. It hurts people. We can't afford to pay the price of another mandate with Mr. Trudeau in power because he hurts the environment. He makes things worse. And so if you care about the environment and you care about creating good jobs, New Democrats are the option for you.
Next question, Karina Roman, CBC News.
Good morning, Mr. Singh. You spend a lot of your time reserving time for criticism of Justin Trudeau, but I just want to look at the blue-orange battles, especially since where we're visiting today. And we're in Saskatchewan, low vaccination rate, high COVID numbers. We're going to Alberta, where they've got a state of emergency, and vaccination rates are actually starting to go up a little bit since they instituted the vaccine passport. What does that show? What do you think that should show people like leaders like Mr. O'Toole, who really talk about personal choice and freedom of choice when it comes to vaccines, public health, and vaccine passports?
Well, I think it speaks to not just the Conservative premiers, but we called early on that the federal government should release a federal vaccine passport. And we just realized how the provincial passports are going to cause problems for traveling within Canada. We had on our own team folks that had a QR code from BC. They tried to use it in Quebec and it didn't work. And so more than ever, we know if we want to make it easier people to show that they're vaccinated, if we want to encourage people to get vaccinated, the federal government should have released a federal vaccine passport months and months ago. Should have put together the resources, got that done right away. If Mr. Trudeau was doing that, it would have encouraged more people to get vaccinated and we would be in a better position. So I blame not just the Conservative premiers who've done a horrible job. If you look at every Conservative premier, they've done horrible jobs in managing this really serious crisis, and it's put people's lives at risk. People have died because of it. That's horrible. But let's not forget, Mr. Trudeau called an election in the fourth wave instead of doing the work necessary to save people. He could have put in a federal vaccine passport. He could have encouraged vaccination, made it easier to get vaccinated. He could have done a lot more. Leadership to me is finding solutions. When he was asked about it, he said, it's not my job. It's not my job to help people. People are dying, and he's the prime minister of this country, and he says it's not his job. If it's not his job, maybe he should leave. Maybe we should get rid of him then. Maybe if it's not his job, he doesn't think it's his job, we should get someone who thinks it is their job to do everything possible. If you are the prime minister of this country, you can't look for excuses. You can't hide behind jurisdiction. You got to work within the federal system, but do whatever you can to save lives. That's what I believe a leader does.
En français, s'il te plaît.
Oui, c'est clair que les premiers ministres conservateurs dans les provinces ont complètement mal géré la pandémie. C'était une faillite. Mais c'est aussi clair que M. Trudeau est aussi une faillite. C'était un échec de leadership de dire « Oh, ce n'est pas mon travail d'aider les provinces, c'est leur travail seul ». Dans une pandémie, dans une crise, un des pires qu'on a vécu dans notre vie, non, je n'accepte pas qu'un leader, c'est quelqu'un qui cherche des excuses, qui dit « Oh non, ce n'est pas mon travail ». S'il pense que c'est son travail, peut-être on doit le remplacer avec quelqu'un qui pense que oui, c'est mon travail d'aider les gens, de trouver des solutions. Si on aurait eu un passeport vaccinal, on a demandé d'avoir un passeport vaccinal depuis des mois, peut-être que ça aurait encouragé plus de gens d'être vaccinés. Et on a vu aussi comment c'est difficile de voyager entre les provinces avec un passeport vaccinal d'une province. C'est difficile de montrer la preuve dans une autre province. On a dit que c'est le gouvernement, c'est le travail du gouvernement d'avoir un document pour montrer la preuve, pour encourager les gens d'être vaccinés. Je pense qu'un leader, c'est quelqu'un qui cherche des solutions, qui essaie d'aider les gens, n'importe quel niveau, On respecte toujours les juridictions, mais ce n'est pas une excuse. C'est un système dans lequel on doit travailler, mais on doit travailler pour trouver des solutions, pour aider les gens.
Today, really, the battle is blue-orange more than orange-red. So in terms of, you're also in a race against the Conservatives and trying to get seats that they hold. Without, this might be a hard request, but without mentioning Mr. Trudeau, without talking about Mr. Trudeau, can you tell voters why they should pick you over Mr. O'Toole?
For Canadians who are worried about the biggest concerns in this pandemic, healthcare, particularly coverage of medication, and our seniors that lost their lives in long-term care because of the horrible conditions in for-profit care, and for people who are worried about who pays for this pandemic, pretty important questions on people's minds. On all three of those questions, who pays for this pandemic? Both Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole teamed up to vote against having the billionaires pay their fair share. Here in this province, when we care deeply about healthcare, we're seeing the impacts on our healthcare system. Both Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole are in governments that either cut healthcare or maintain those cuts. Both Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Trudeau voted against pharmacare, something that the vast majority of Canadians believe in. And both Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole voted against getting profit out of long-term care. They both are for profit in long-term care services. So when they try to debate who is more into privatization or not, it's a hypothetical. I got the facts. Both of them voted for keeping the greed and the profit in our long-term care system. Both of them will hurt Canadians. So I send a message clearly to people. If you care about who pays for this pandemic and you don't want it to be you or your family, vote New Democrat. If you care about making sure we get rid of profit and greed in the long-term care system, vote New Democrat. If you care about our healthcare workers and our healthcare system and want to keep it public, vote New Democrat. Mr. Trudeau has been all for show. His decisions have hurt people. He has shown whose side he's on. He's not on your side. We are on your side and we're fighting for you.
En français, s'il te plaît.
Oui. Dans cette élection, les libéraux et les conservateurs, on a eu des arguments entre de qui est pour la privatisation des soins de santé et qui est contre. C'est une question hypothétique, mais on a la preuve. On a présenté une motion pour enlever les profits dans les soins des centres de soins de longue durée. Et les deux, M. Trudeau et M. O'Toole, ont voté contre enlever les profits. Ça veut dire qu'il est pour les profits dans nos centres de soins de longue durée. Dans cette élection, on a trois questions primordiales. On pense de nos aînés qui ont perdu leur vie dans cette pandémie. On pense de notre soin de santé. On pense de qui va payer le prix pour la pandémie. Dans chaque question, c'est clair que M. Trudeau et M. O'Toole ont travaillé ensemble pour voter contre la science médicaments. Ils ont voté contre éliminer les profits dans les centres de soins de longue durée. Et les deux ont voté contre faire payer le juste part des ultra riches. Donc, pour ces trois questions primordiales dans cette élection, ils ne sont pas la bonne option. Ils ont montré qu'ils sont des bords des ultra riches. On se bat pour vous. On est là pour vous. On va continuer de montrer comment vous êtes notre priorité. Donc, si vous voulez quelqu'un qui va investir dans nos soins de santé, c'est nous. Si vous voulez quelqu'un qui va s'attaquer les centres de soins de longue durée à but lucratif, c'est nous. Si vous voulez faire payer les justes parts des ultra riches, c'est nous, les néo-démocrates.
Prochaine question, Jean-Sébastien Cloutier, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, M. Singh.
Bonjour.
Là, vous avez mentionné Aaron O'Toole parce que ma collègue vous en a parlé, mais depuis quelques jours, dans toutes vos réponses, vous attaquez Justin Trudeau et vous ne mentionnez jamais les conservateurs, presque. Qu'est-ce qu'il faut en comprendre? Est-ce que vous jugez que pour votre intérêt, l'intérêt de votre parti, un gouvernement libéral est plus menaçant que les conservateurs?
Non, ce n'est pas du tout le cas. Chaque fois, on a montré comment M. Trudeau a travaillé ensemble avec M. O'Toole. Je le répète chaque jour parce que c'est important de savoir, les deux vont faire mal aux gens. Chaque jour, je montre clairement que pour les questions primordiales, pour les soins de santé, pour l'environnement, pour faire payer le juste part des ultra riches, la question qui va payer la facture pour cette relance, pour la pandémie, pour ces questions importantes, je dis primordiales, pour ces questions, c'est clair Monsieur Trudeau et Monsieur O'Toole ont travaillé ensemble pour voter contre faire payer le juste part des autres riches. Ils ont voté contre l'idée d'une assurance médicaments universelle. Ils ont voté contre éliminer les profits dans les centres de soins de longue durée. Les deux ont montré clairement qu'ils sont contre les gens et qui est-ce qu'ils défendent? Ils défendent les autres riches. Dans chaque vote, c'était les autres riches à eux, un côté, et monsieur, madame, tout le monde, l'autre côté, et ils ont choisi les autres riches. Les centres de soins de longue durée à but lucratif, les grandes compagnies pharmaceutiques, les autres riches, ils ont montré pour qui ils se battent. Ils sont pour les riches, nous sommes pour vous. Et on va le montrer à chaque reprise parce qu'on a la preuve. Et ça fait mal aux gens, ça blesse les gens, c'est difficile pour les gens. On a une option qui va aider les gens. On est là pour vous. Et je veux le montrer encore et encore.
Si on en croit les sondages aujourd'hui, vous pourriez vous retrouver dans 2 jours avec la balance du pouvoir à Ottawa. C'est quelque chose que vous voyez d'un bon œil. Comment vous envisagez ça?
Pour nous, notre but, primordialement, essentiellement, notre but, c'est d'aider les gens. Donc, on va respecter la décision de la population, les citoyens. Ils vont décider le lundi. Mais je veux s'assurer les gens, n'importe votre décision, vous pouvez vous assurer que nous sommes un parti qui va toujours se battre pour vous. Dans n'importe quel gouvernement est choisi, vous pouvez être sûr qu'on va continuer de se battre pour faire payer le juste part des autres riches. On va continuer de se battre pour vous. Donc, vous pouvez avoir cette confiance qu'on est là pour vous, on était toujours là pour vous. Dans cette gouvernement minoritaire passé, on a utilisé notre position pour livrer plus d'aide pour plus de gens. C'est exactement ce qu'on fait. On travaille pour vous, on se bat pour vous, pas pour les riches comme M. Trudeau, mais pour les gens.
Next question, Robin Gill, Global News.
Good morning. You're
Morning.
campaigning in Saskatchewan and Alberta today. These are 2 COVID hotspots. Are you taking advantage of the anger against the provincial Conservative governments with their handling of this crisis? And how are you benefiting from that as a party?
Well, people should be angry at the Conservative premiers. They did a horrible job, and it put people's lives at risk. And it shows really clearly when you cut healthcare, when you cut supports for healthcare workers, when you make it impossible for nurses and frontline healthcare workers to do their jobs, it hurts those workers. They get burnt out, but it hurts people. People end up suffering because of these cuts. These cuts hurt people. And we're seeing the horrible decisions of the Conservatives, and they impact directly on people. But we're in a 4th wave of COVID-19, and we're in a campaign instead of being in Ottawa fighting for people, instead of putting in place measures a month ago that could have maybe helped to reduce the impact of this 4th wave. We could have been doing things to make things easier for people, but Mr. Trudeau chose a selfish election. So I want to make it clear, I absolutely condemn the Conservative Premier's horrible leadership, but I also condemn Mr. Trudeau's horrible leadership. The fact that he called a pandemic or called an election in a pandemic that no one wanted, and to this date, he can't even explain why he called it. That is a lack of leadership. And we could have been helping people instead of seeing people suffer. Mr. Trudeau is to blame for that as well.
So
What prime minister calls an election in the midst of a pandemic like that? So we want people to know you can't trust the Conservatives, you can't trust the Liberals. They've hurt you. New Democrats are here for you.
So how would you have handled this pandemic differently?
We asked Mr. Trudeau 22 times over 18 months to expand access to paid sick leave. That was one of the things that experts have said was one of the most important tools to keep people safe. 22 times Mr. Trudeau said no. 22 times he said no to workers. 22 times he said no to people who were getting sick and still going into work because they had no way to make the impossible choice of going into work sick or staying at home and not knowing if they could pay the bills because they didn't have paid sick leave. 22 times he said no, and in the midst of a campaign, he says, oh, I would do it, actually. What is that? That is the height of cynicism. That is so cynical. It's frankly disgusting. For 18 months, we demanded something. 22 times we said, you got to do it. He said no. He even mocked the question. Multiple times, we have him on video mocking the question. While people were dying, while people were going into work sick, he was mocking the question. And then in the campaign, he has the audacity to say, oh yeah, actually, no, it's a good idea. We would do it. That's how bad his leadership is. We said there should be a federal vaccine passport right away, months and months ago. We said it's a great idea to have, not for international travel alone, but for local travel. We know that those vaccine passports encourage people to get vaccinated, and it would help in the fight against the pandemic. Mr. Trudeau has taken a hands-off approach. He was asked the question and he admitted it. It's no secret. He doesn't think it's his job. He said, it's not my job to interfere. It's not my job to get involved. It's not my job to do anything. I mean, it's pretty clear that he didn't think it was his job to do anything to help fight the pandemic in a proactive way. I don't think that's leadership. If you're the prime minister of a country, you find a way to help out. You solve the problems. You look for solutions. You've got a massive amount of resources at the federal level. How dare you say it's not your job to save lives? If it's not your job, whose job would it be? What other prime ministers out there? And that's what I would say. I mean, for me, a leader is someone who tries to help people no matter what. A leader who takes proactive decisions. We would have put in place a paid sick leave program that worked right away, right in the beginning, so that people wouldn't have to go to work sick. Workplace infection was the highest rate of infection for a long period of this pandemic. That could have been prevented. We would have implemented vaccine passports right away so people would have that avenue to show proof of vaccination and encourage more people to get vaccinated. We would have done a lot better. We are up against what Mr. Trudeau has done, and I want folks to know he is not here for you. New Democrats are.
Next question, Menaka Raman-Wilms from the Globe and Mail.
Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Singh. Your campaign seems to pride itself on its positivity, but so much of what you actually end up saying is quite negative, mostly when you're talking about Mr. Trudeau. So are you worried that you may turn off some voters who are motivated by your positive message, but they're also bothered by the negative aspects that you're presenting?
Well, what Canadians to know is they can make a choice. And making that choice, you've got to point out the mistakes that have been made. The difference is, and I've seen Conservatives do this often, they just seem to want to attack someone just for the sake of it. I don't like that. I'm not into that. I want to attack the decisions, because the decisions do have horrible outcomes. I care deeply about people. And it hurts me when I see bad decisions being made. And I want people to know those bad decisions. People should know that Mr. Trudeau has sided with the billionaires time and time again. That is a bad choice that he makes, and it hurts people. People can't pay the price of that. But people should also know that there are ways that we can make things better. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the opportunities we have. If we make the billionaires pay their fair share, we can invest in our healthcare system. We can lift people up. We can bring in universal healthcare that includes medication coverage, that's truly universal, that includes dental care, that includes mental health care. There's so much that we can do, but people have a choice in this election. And that choice requires us pointing out the benefits and the harms. Mr. Trudeau has been all for show, and that hurts people. People have told me that they can't afford that. They can't afford to pay the price of that anymore, because they felt the pain of that in their lives. When people can't afford to buy a home, when they can't afford their medication, when the climate crisis gets worse, that's the price that people pay for Mr. Trudeau, who does a lot of things for show. It sounds like he's doing the right thing, but doesn't do the right thing. People end up hurting from that, and it's important for people to know. But that's why I want folks to know that we are here for you. We are fighters. You know, our candidates are going to fight for you. We're going to lift you up. Things will get better if you have people that are on your side. And that choice is in Canadians' hands.
And you've spent a lot of time energizing young voters in this election. And even though they might want to vote for you, though, they might not get out to the polls on Monday. So what will you be doing in the last couple of days to ensure that your supporters, and particularly young supporters, actually get out to vote?
Well, we're hearing lots of folks already have voted, and we've heard from a lot of folks. Even my candidates were mentioning a lot of first-time voters. People who've never voted in their life are now voting. They found how easy it is to vote. I've had a number of events where first-time voters came out and said, I did it. It was easy. It was amazing. I loved it. I've heard a lot of people that voted Liberals in the past, and they voted for Mr. Trudeau, and they say, you know what? It's hurt me though. Like, I've paid the price of that, and I don't want to do it again. And so lots of folks that voted Liberal before are voting New Democrat, and that's really exciting. We've got a website, howuvote.ca. We're encouraging people to check it out. It'll help you make a plan to vote. Make a plan to vote. If you've already voted or you are voting, then encourage 3 other people. Text them, call them, message them, let them know that you can get out and vote. I'm excited about what's going to happen in this election, because I know people are going to vote. Young people are going to vote like never before. And we know that it's easy, and lots of folks are already voting and will vote on Monday.
Next question, Olivia Stefanovich from CBC News.
Good morning, Mr. Singh.
Morning.
You've advocated for the federal government to end litigation against the Human Rights Tribunal order to compensate Indigenous children who attended the child welfare system. I'm wondering, why don't you make this a condition for supporting a minority government if you're really serious about this?
Mr. Trudeau has said that Indigenous communities matter, and instead of listening to the Human Rights Tribunal, he has appealed it, he is fighting it, he's fighting kids in court. We've said that's a wrong thing to do. We will continue to say it's a wrong thing to do. And New Democrats will fight to make sure he stops those legal battles.
The question was about what you would do, not what Mr. Trudeau is doing, whether you would make this a condition of supporting a minority government. But to move on, how can you criticize Liberal leader Justin Trudeau over his handling with Raj Saini and the Toronto candidate when you've stood by Wab Kinew, calling him your brother, even though he faces allegations of domestic violence by his former girlfriend? Why don't you believe this woman, and why do you seem to only believe women who come forward and make allegations against Liberals but not New Democrats?
Wab has been really honest about his life, and he has changed things in his life. Mr. Trudeau has had a pattern of behavior as Prime Minister where he has shown clearly that he is not listening to women and doesn't believe women. He has clearly shown a pattern of behavior that has put women at risk because he has not done anything in the 6 years that he's been in power as Prime Minister to put in place an independent process in the Canadian Armed Forces. He took 2 days to make a decision about a Toronto candidate, to remove him as candidate. That shouldn't have taken 20 minutes. You know immediately whether he was lying or not. They took 2 days to come out and say, oh, he lied to us. Well, you must have known that in the seconds it took you to read the article. So Mr. Trudeau has shown again and again a complete failure of leadership when it comes to listening to women, believing women, and doing anything to protect women. That is a failure of leadership.
Next question, Annie Bergeron-Oliver, CTV News.
Hi, Mr. Singh. On August 12th, just days before the election, you were polling at 20.7%. Today, you're at 20.9%. Why haven't you been able to move the needle?
You know, we're working hard. Liberals often take people's votes for granted. Conservatives take people's votes for granted. We work hard for you. We work hard to gain people's confidence, and we're going to keep on working hard. We know that people have a choice in this election, and we want to put that choice to Canadians. You want to choose someone who's all for show. Mr. Trudeau has been all for show. He has broken promises that end up making people pay the price, or do you want to choose New Democrats who will fight for you? That's a choice Canadians will make, and we'll keep on fighting for you no matter what. You can always count on us to be there for you.
So you've had 35 days now to grow support. That doesn't seem like it's happened in the polls. You have just a couple days left. The Liberals have brought out Jean Chrétien. The Conservatives have brought out Mulroney. Obviously, there's been no NDP government, so you don't have a prime minister to bring out. But you do have a premier, John Horgan. He hasn't come out once with you. You were there campaigning for him. What gives?
We've got a great relationship with the BC NDP and with John Horgan, but we want folks to know that in this campaign, you've got a choice. And that choice is an important one. I know folks are thinking about it a lot, and they're thinking about what's happened over the past 6 years. And they're thinking about how everything that they really cared about, the environment, housing, healthcare, things have gotten worse, not better. Mr. Trudeau has made decisions that have hurt you and your family. You've got a choice in this election. Do you want to go again with another all for show 4 years of Mr. Trudeau? Someone who's not going to focus on getting you the help that you need, someone who's going to break commitments and make things worse, and people end up paying the price, or New Democrats who are going to fight for you? I put that choice to Canadians.
Respectfully, though, that doesn't answer the question. It was a simple, why hasn't Horgan come out to campaign with you? He's the only NDP government official that you guys have.
Well, I want Canadians, again, that you've got a choice in this election. That choice is Mr. Trudeau, all for show. New Democrats, we fight for you. And we're here to fight for you.
Next question, Kelly Malone, the Canadian Press.
You say you can lead Canada out of the pandemic. So what does the end of the pandemic look like to you, and how long will it take to get there?
It's going to take making sure we get everyone vaccinated. It's going to take making sure we've got protections in place, like paid sick leave, so that no one has to go into work sick. We know that many times in this pandemic, people were going into work sick, and that workplace transmission of the virus was one of the highest sources of transmission. We want to make sure people don't have to do that anymore. They don't have to go into work sick. We know that good conditions of work with proper protections in place, access to PPE, high levels of vaccination, and supports for people that can't go to work. These are the hallmarks of what a New Democrat plan would look like. We want to bring in supports to continue for small businesses, but we want to make sure that the big box stores and the large corporations start paying their fair share to invest that back into people. We've got a plan that's going to make sure people are at the heart of our solutions, and that healthcare is something we invest in. We want to make sure that never again do we see our loved ones in long-term care bear the brunt of the pandemic. They should never be the ones that have to bear the brunt of this. And there are clear problems in our long-term care system that need to be fixed. And one of those is profit in a long-term care system. We would eliminate it, make sure all delivery of long-term care services is not for profit, it's public, and we can do that. And that's what we're focused on, how we can solve the problems by making people the heart of the solution.
The pandemic response around health and public health orders are provincial jurisdiction. Mr. Kenney and Scott Moe's government had the jurisdiction to make those choices. So how would you as Prime Minister and an NDP government have responded differently to their decisions? And with that in mind, how can you ensure your provincial counterparts and voters that you will work with them and not overstep into that jurisdiction?
Well, there's two different approaches to this. There's the Mr. Trudeau approach, which has been, it's not my job. And if you approach a problem that it's not your job, you're not going to come up with solutions. We would approach this like it is our job. Everything that we can do to help out and save people's lives is our job. And so one of the things that we know would have been the most important tool that would have helped people stay safe is a paid sick leave program that works. We asked 22 times for Mr. Trudeau to expand it, and he didn't. That is one hallmark plan that would have made a massive difference in saving people's lives. And it's something that we would put in place right away. Our plan was a federal delivered program that would help people not have to go into work when they're sick. And that would help in every province and territory. So that's one plan that we would do right away. The federal vaccine passport, we called for that months and months ago. That's something that would also encourage people to get vaccinated. We see that vaccine passports encourage people to get vaccinated. We would put that in place months ago so that people had that option for people who are traveling within provinces, but also as a way to encourage people to get vaccinated. There are so many things that we can do to ensure that people that are hard to vaccinate have access to the vaccine, that we come out to them, to where they live, to their communities, to get people vaccinated. New Democrats would have taken a much more proactive step, and we will still continue to fight for those proactive steps.
Next question, Mackenzie Gray, CTV News.
Good morning, Mr. Zhang. I just want to follow up on what John asked you earlier in the press conference. Should the party that wins the most seats on Monday get the first crack at forming government?
Our position around what's going to happen on Monday is that people are going to have to make that choice. And in making that choice, people want to know where I stand. I'll let folks know. I'm going to fight for you. I have fought for you in the pandemic. My team, New Democrats, have fought for you in the pandemic. And whatever people choose, whatever parliament they choose, we will fight for them. I'm running for Prime Minister. I think if you vote for more New Democrats, you will get the things that you want. If you want healthcare that's public, that's universal from head to toe, where we invest in our healthcare workers and we invest in you, then vote New Democrat. If you believe in universal pharmacare, vote New Democrat. If you want to see profit removed from long-term care, vote New Democrat. So people will determine what happens on Monday. But I want to put the choice to them. You've got a real clear choice here. Mr. Trudeau has said a lot of things, hasn't backed them up. And in fact, has broken a lot of commitments that hurts people. People end up paying the price. New Democrats are here for you. We fought for you in the pandemic. We will fight for you in the recovery. You can trust us to fight for you.
So now that's 3 times you've been asked and you haven't been able to answer the question. So let me try it another way. Could you support a party that won fewer seats? So let's say the Liberals win fewer seats than the Conservatives. Could you support Mr. Trudeau as Prime Minister, even though he, in this situation, would be the second place party in Parliament?
The decision about what's going to happen on Monday is in people's hands. They're going to make that call. And I want to help people make that decision. And helping to make that decision, I want them to know where I stand. I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to make sure the super wealthy pay their fair share. Mr. Trudeau has sided with the super wealthy time and time again. You cannot trust him if you want to make sure the burden doesn't fall on you. We are going to make sure that it's the wealthy that pay their fair share. You've got a choice in this election. Mr. Trudeau, who's defended the super wealthy, or New Democrats who will fight for you, make sure that the super wealthy pay their fair share.
That concludes our press conference. Thank you, merci.
Thank you. Merci. Thank you all. Thanks for standing here so long.